Now that we've focused primarily on the technical and strategic aspects of project management, we'll pay special attention to the leadership competency and connecting it all into the performance of project management. To start, what do I mean by leadership skills? Take a minute to think about someone in your life that you've considered a great leader. Maybe there's someone from work, from home, or maybe from a hobby. What was it about them that makes them an effective leader? Often we think of someone who has great interpersonal skills, demonstrates respect, communicates well, is visionary, and someone who has someone who values the people around them. In project management, being an effective leader really is all about the people. Without the people and the experts who are working on the project, the work won't get done and the project would suffer. So it's not necessarily a technical job, rather motivating and organizing people to do the work that must be done to meet the objectives of the project. So as a project manager, I'd like you to think of your role as one who enables and empowers. Your goal is to really elevate and enable the project team to be able to do their best work. This means listening and acting upon the concerns that stakeholders might have. It also means making sure that the team has the resources they need and the information they need to do their job. Because you likely won't have direct authority over the project team, do what you can do to empower them to accomplish their piece of the project and work with the right stakeholders to resolve the issues. In PMI's 2013 Pulse of the Profession Navigating Complexity report, it's noted that this includes managing emotions, acting courageously, which often sometimes affects you in the politics of the organization, inspiring teammates, which also often requires building momentum, and committing to a culture of accountability, trust, and continuous improvement. Leadership in this context really has less to do with authority and has more to do with influence. This is really a great time to talk about stakeholder management, one of PMI's knowledge groups that we mentioned, which involves identifying the people, groups, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by the project, to analyze expectations and their influence on the project, and to develop the management and engagement strategies based on your assessment. In the next sequence, I'll go over how to identify and analyze stakeholders, but here we'll discuss the overarching concept, which is to manage and engage stakeholders in an effective way, because they will have a huge impact on whether your project succeeds or fails. As I mentioned early on, a stakeholder is essentially anyone who has a vested interest in the outcome of a project, and therefore likely has some level of interest and influence. As a project manager, your role is to engage with stakeholders to the appropriate degree, at the appropriate stage, and in the appropriate mannerism, based on your analysis. For example, the type of information that you share with the project team is likely very different than the insight that you expose to your customer. Similarly, the project sponsor may want to be heavily involved in the details of the project, but perhaps the business leader may want no more than to just sign off on requests. This is always changing based upon the people and the environment, so it's up to you to plan for evaluating the landscape and preparing your tactics around who's involved, impacted, or who can influence. Another example is that you'll likely need to manage stakeholder conflict or competing interests at some point in your experience. So it's your goal to really navigate this with intention. As a project manager, a key attribute to work towards is your ability to influence. This involves appealing to stakeholders' perspectives, influences, interests, etc., and ensuring the support and commitment where needed. One effective way of influencing stakeholders is to move through a conversation style that brings you both closer to the common ground. First, you want to identify and clarify your stakeholders' position so that you make sure you understand where they're coming from. Secondly, you want to review the impact of this concern or the request. This will give you both insight into how to move forward. Thirdly, You want to work together to establish some alternatives, if they exist, that can satisfy your stakeholders' position. And lastly, when in doubt, you want to negotiate to arrive at an agreement that is feasible to the project and really won't cannibalize other projects or initiatives. Another key stakeholder management tool is managing expectations. Being realistic with your sponsor and all other stakeholders is really your obligation. So if someone requests an unrealistic requirement, you're really in the position of having to explain to them why that can't be fulfilled. What you don't want to do is find yourself in the position of committing to goals that you can't deliver on. Let's talk a little bit about a communications plan. Another important aspect to integrate into your project leadership is a communications plan. Whether you decide to document your plan or simply hold an in-person meeting to share your plan, informing stakeholders and the project team about how you intend to communicate with them and what they can expect is critical. How should team members ask questions when they arise? Should they find you in person? Should they email you? Should they call you? What if an imminent concern arises and they need to reach you? How should they get in contact with you? What is their best course of action? Perhaps your communications looks like daily stand-ups, where each team member provides status updates and discusses issues. Or perhaps it's weekly check-ins or the use of a project management information system, which is a platform used to communicate project work, assignments, and ask questions. A few important notes about communication. Number 1 is emails. If your preferred method of communication is email, that's perfectly fine. And while there's no rule on emails, and it's up to your style to determine how you'd like to email, a helpful tip is to avoid writing a novel, as you'll quickly lose the attention of your stakeholders. Create a protocol with your team, outlining things like the appropriate stakeholders who will receive certain types of information. What types of emails do you send to who? At what frequency will you send emails so that this creates expectations from your stakeholders? What is the response or the CC expectation? And how will the subject of the email set the tone of the message? When creating a communications plan, consider the following to help you outline your strategy. What is it that you're trying to communicate? When must it be done? How will the communication be delivered? How often will the communication occur? Who owns the communication to make sure it happens? And to whom is the communication being sent? Once you've analyzed your stakeholders and project team, as well as answered these questions, you're ready to propose your communications plan. Risk management is another process that we've talked about in the knowledge areas, and I'd like to talk about here as a process of identifying, analyzing, and responding to project risk. So, what is project risk? PMI defines risk as an uncertain event or condition that, if occurs, has a positive or negative impact on a project's deliverables. Even though you may not be able to identify all of the project risks, beginning the process of risk management occurs early in the project and is really a systemic approach, in that it's up to you as a project manager to thoroughly evaluate internal and external threats and risks to help prepare and plan for them. So when you think risk management, think along the lines of being proactive rather than reactive. Proactive being planning in the beginning, reactive being in the midst of execution. Some typical examples of possible risks that can occur include the loss of a team member, technical failures, poor suppliers, weather challenges, etc. We'll talk more about the process of risk management and how to implement it in the next sequence. But the key takeaway is that identifying and planning for risk should occur in the early stages of project management and involves working very closely with stakeholders who bring that historical knowledge and expertise to the table. So to wrap up, we've covered our foundational concepts, practices, and policies. In the next sequence, we'll build on this and hone in on the methodologies and techniques to give you the real-life application to be a successful project manager.